Hello, we're back here now again, and we have Seán Kelly, and now we're going to talk to you about his Gortycloona Theatre Company. If anybody goes on the Bantry Town Facebook pages, you will see one page called Bantry Down Memory Lane, and what's featured a lot in that is pictures of times gone by, and one that stands out to me a lot is a lot of pictures of very well-known faces in Bantry. A lot of them have now deceased, and they were featured out in Gortycloona, and that's where the theatre company was. And so I'd like to talk to Seán to give the history of when was this, who was involved, and maybe who set it up. So I'd like to pass over to Seán as to when you think this came about and how it started.
Yeah. As you were speaking there about Facebook, which I don't touch social media myself, I must admit my biases straight away. The thought crossed my mind of, the lines from Bantry Bay, some are gone upon their last loved homing, some are left but they are old and grey. That would be very true in relation to Gortycloona. So Gortycloona would have started there in the late 60s. And how did it come to pass that an old schoolhouse, which was actually where I got my primary education, suddenly became, I go so far as to say, almost a world-famous theatre eventually? Well, I think there was a couple of factors involved. One, we had Whitty construction was happening, and construction was more or less over at that stage. We had a lot of people who had come into Bantry. You had a lot of sort of diverse cultural elements going on in the town at the time, and I suppose it was ripe for things like theatre at that particular time. So there was a move afoot, I believe, in the town among people who liked theatre to try to get something going on the dramatic front. Now, coupled with that, by sheer coincidence and by great good luck, a couple of people from Holland had settled in the Bantry area out in Derryfodder around the same time, Pete Cameron and his wife Ellie. And these were professional theatre people from Holland. And their kind of advice was enlisted, obviously, and they were very enthusiastic about the project. In actual fact, I think they had previously been instrumental in setting up a theatre in the East Indies. And then the final bit of the jigsaw, of course, was you needed a building. Now, you had a boys' club, had a stage, but that was used quite a lot for sport, and was even being used at the time, of course, by the as a school. So they wanted something, I suppose, that was more a dedicated theatre than that. But as luck should have it, Gortycloona had closed its doors to teaching classes in Christmas of '68. The building at that stage would still have been in fairly good nick. Father Clone was in the town at the time as one of the priests, and he put in a good word with the parish priest of the day, Canon Conley, I think it was, about the possible leasing of the building. So an agreement was reached that this new theatre, which was officially called UNIT, United Interest in Theatre, would lease the building. UNIT would be responsible for its maintenance, insurance, upkeep, all the rest of it, and they would then have more or less a free hand in redesigning it on the inside to suit theatrical purposes. And it went from there. There was a lot of voluntary work put in to the actual redesigning of it. Many long hours, and the whole place was transformed basically into a theatre. One of the peculiarities of it was that because it was actually a 3-room school in its heyday. In my time going there as a pupil, it was a 2-room school, and we had one spare room. That became a coffee bar. The theatre was made from the 2 classrooms, but because of the angles that people had to be put, they were more or less seated at right angles to each other, The whole building would hold about 70 capacity. The stage, you couldn't have it facing one section of the audience and the other crowd only seeing it from the side. So the solution to that was there was a kind of a triangular stage in the corner with the front of the stage going across from one wall to another, which were at right angles to each other. It was decided then as well that a curtain wouldn't really be feasible with that kind of setup, and so the lighting was used instead of a curtain, so that when the play was starting, the house lights went down, there was a total blackout, the actors came out, took their places on the stage, total darkness, and then the lights came up slowly and you went into the actual play itself. So that's how it came to be, that it happened in that particular place at that particular time.
What year was that?
The first play actually took place in 1971, the spring of 1971. Now I would say that there was about at least a year of preparation leading up to that, because as I said earlier, there was a huge amount of work had to be done to kind of repurpose this place as a theatre, and all of it was voluntary. And you know, a lot of it supplied locally. People, we had a big supply of manpower from people who were working particularly in the towns, because their work setup was that they might be on 24-hour shifts for a period of time, and then they'd have a week off. So many of those would come out and work voluntarily there, building sets, reconstructing the interior of the place and so on, and putting up lighting and arranging for all the kind of the infrastructure, we'd say, of the theatre.
And do you remember the name of the first play, what it was about?
I do. I went to the first play. I hadn't been involved in the preliminaries of this, but I went to the first play as part of the audience, and I couldn't believe what had been achieved. It was a play by a Russian playwright called Gogol, and it was called The Proposal. Now, the thing that fascinated me was, you know, when I heard that they were going to stage a play by Gogol in Gortycloona, I went along partly to see the play and partly out of curiosity to see what local people would make of all this. And it was absolutely fascinating because, of course, the play was picked deliberately. This was a story of matchmaking in a rural setting in Russia. And it was based on the assumption that rural people don't vary actually that very much from one culture to another. So the people, local farmers and so forth who went there, they understood perfectly what was going on with the matchmaking and the bargaining and the offers of dowries and the counter proposals and so forth.
Progressed from there then into international plays, if I say.
It did. The first year, you know, there was money had to be made as well, and there was a sort of a popular play put on for the summer, played to the tourists this time. This was to be the money spinner, and it was quite funny actually. It was quite an amusing play. It was called The Sextet, and it was a play about a kind of a, let's say, a most unusual kind of guest house.
It sounds very interesting. And were there Irish authors for the plays? For any?
We had Irish authors as well, yes. There was. I've made a list of the plays just to show the variety that they have. But one of the strengths, I suppose, of the place was that these people, Pete and Ellie, were Europeans, and they were drawing very much on a European tradition as well. And one of the other plays, and yes, it was an Irish author, except that he didn't spend too much time living in Ireland. Like Derry O'Sullivan, he spent a lot of his time most of his life living in Paris. Samuel Beckett, and they put on Waiting for Godot.
Given the existences of the sport and the public works of puncher and watchman of a god, quack, 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 with white beard, quack, 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 outside time, outside extinction, who from the heights of the fine Tambia, the fine Tasha loves us dearly, with some exceptions for reasons unknown, but time will tell, and suffers like the divine Miranda, plunged in Tamman, whose fire flames, and if that continues, and who can doubt it will father feminine, that is to say, blast hell to heaven, blue steel, so calm, with a calm, even though intermittent is better than nothing, but not so fast, and considering what is more, that is the result of the man in essay, the man in short, the man in brief, in spite of the strides of alimentation and defecation is seen to waste, pine waste, and simultaneously concurrently what is more, that the result of the practice of physical culture, the practice of sports such as running, jumping, dying, flying, sports of all sorts, in a word for reasons unknown, but time will tell, and so like the divine man, the plunge and torment whose fire flames, and if that continues, and who can doubt it will for the feminine, that is to say, blast hell to heaven, blue still so calm with a calm, even though intermittent is better than nothing, but not so fast. And considering what is more, that man in short, that man in essay, that man in short, that man in brief, in spite of the strides of alimentation and defecation is seen to waste, pine waste, simultaneously concurrently. What is more, that is the result of the practice of physical culture, the practice of sports such as running, jumping, diving, flying, sports of all sorts, tennis, hockey of all sorts, in a word for reasons unknown.
And Mankiewicz was internationally recognised as a very serious culture critic, and he would write for all the upmarket publications in the UK for one, probably others as well, and he'd write critiques of plays and so forth. So he came to see Waiting for Godot, and he was so impressed that he wrote a critique in the Cork Examiner, in which he said, among other things, that this production in Gortycloona was surpassed the West End production in London.
Wow.
And then everybody wanted to know from there on. You know, everybody wanted a part of the action when this came about. So, yeah, there were, of course, many plays produced there. And just to make sure there that I hit the kind of range of plays that were produced there, I'll just go through there some of the really good ones that were done. There was a one by a fellow called Strindberg called Miss Julie. Chekhov, who had a play called The Proposal. Then, going back to Ireland, we had a 3-in-1, which was 3 one-act plays. 2 were by Seán, and 1 was written by Pete Cameron himself. Or Pete liked to be, his title was artistic director, because of the fact that he was a professional. He couldn't be directly involved as a manager or a producer or anything like that, but he could be play the role of a consultant. Then you had a play which I never quite understood myself, I must say, it's a very difficult one, Simple Swallows, by a man called Dubillard. There was The Dragoons, which had great appeal kind of for the Irish. It was about the British occupation in Ireland, going back a bit, you know, the time of the Redcoats. You had Autumn Fire by Murray, which would be a fairly well-known stand-up play in Ireland. There was 3 one-acts by John B. Keane, and he specified that if you were putting one on, you had to put the other 2 on as well. You had Shakespeare, Midsummer's Night Dream. You had The Happy Journey by a fellow called Wilder. The Zoo Story by Albee, an American. You had Slippers by Ackbutton, a British playwright. And 6 Characters in Search of an Author by an Italian called Pirandello. I did a part in that myself. There was Lovers by Brian Friel. Faustus Kelly, no relation, by a fellow called O'Nolan. And The Owl and the Pussycat. So, you know, that's a cross-section of the kind of plays that were done there. But he had a kind of a very gentle voice, and he was actually playing Puck, the fairy, in the Midsummer Night Dream. And he had to jump out from behind a tree and roar to frighten people. We had a very small audience, the weather was bad. And somebody looked out before the cast went on and said, "Asher, we can relax tonight. There's only 3 people out there." And Pete blew a fuse. Said, "Those 3 people all have paid their admission fee to come and see a play. They are as important as if you had the house full.
Were there star performers that then, like, could you think of some names that would you really consider to be?
I can,
top class?
but I am not going to mention star performers. There are a lot of very good performers there. A man called Mick Mackey, who used to work on Beatles.
Okay.
And Mick actually wrote a play for Gortycloona called See You in September. And it was about this man who was fanatically devoted to Christy Ring. Video footage we didn't have, photographs.
Yeah, photographs.
Yeah.
So, when did it close, or what? How did it? What's the start of the demise?
The start of the demise, really, again, two tragedies. One, the Whitty disaster.
Okay, 79.
79, which changed, a lot of the people who would have been involved probably moved away after that.
Okay.
But of course, the thing that really put the nail in the coffin was the Stardust. Because standards for buildings that admitted the public became so high, building standards and safety standards. Fellows would go back maybe and open the place up for a bit, do a play, then silence again maybe for a year.
Okay.
And gradually, as happens with buildings which haven't used, ceilings started to get shaky and plaster fall down and things like that, and the building started to fall apart, and it had to be closed for health and safety reasons, really.
Is it still there?
The building is still there, but I mean, it hasn't been touched since then, and you know yourself now as a building man, it wouldn't have improved. And this was a building that was originally opened in 1905.
Okay. Very interesting story. Great history there.
Yeah, it was kind of, we're talking about creativity. This was a huge burst of creativity
and diversity
in the Bantry area.